So almost in every direction that you look, we have an office that is dysfunctional. And my hope and the reason why I'm running is because I want to come around and I really want to address these issues. I believe that we can actually have a safer community and do so in a more thoughtful and intelligent way. When I was a DA in San Francisco, we lowered violent crime during my time in office, whereas violent crime in LA County during the current administration has gone up by 30%, at the same time that incarceration has continued to go up. Again, showing that there is no connection between over-incarceration and community safety, to the contrary. So those are some of the reasons and kind of the contextually where I see this race and the importance of this race.
So this is a very exciting opportunity to talk about. George, can I ask you questions? Or are you still talking? I wanted to ask you a couple questions.
No, I'm ready to take any questions that you guys may have.
So one thing that's you know, been a big issue for us, you know, practicing here and advising people on everything from criminal defense to what the laws are regarding cannabis, is that in the cannabis, you know, spectrum here, we have a situation where some of the licenses can be awarded directly through the city council. At the same time, we have at least one city council member under active investigation revealed in LA Times over corruption in cannabis involving the FBI. And that's just one example, and there's like many that are going on. But it's really, we want to just kind of, I wanted to ask you, like, how would you handle that kind of situation and the integrity of like our local laws and our local regulations while that kind of thing is going on? And it's a very bizarre type thing. I've been very excited to ask you like how you would handle it. But that's kind of what the situation is. And I can kind of,
I was just going to say
about it while we're talking, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. Raza, chime in.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say the problems are with the local government corruption is everyone kind of knows each other and doesn't want to go after their homies. So how can the DA office be sort of insulated from other government officials so you can effectively police them and you know, when they cross the line that people have faith that the DAs are going to be independent and go after who needs to be go after instead of protecting their friends, you know, within the government.
I'm gonna show you this article.
You actually raised an important point. I'm sorry?
I'm gonna show the article to you guys just about this so we can, I don't wanna, you know, we're not trying to accuse anyone ourselves, but this is what do you guys see my screen here? Do you guys see that? Oops, no, sorry. Do you guys see the screen here with the former Weezer staffer sues alleges councilman wanted cannabis kickbacks? Can you guys see that?
Right.
Yes.
So that's the story. So that's what we're dealing with. And this guy, by the way, this person in the lawsuit, Raza and my dad met with this person just as like a relevant aside and in the middle of all this. So yeah, well, what do you think we should do?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, the problem is that you have a DA that is not independent, right? He's shown over and over again also that she's willing to use the authority and the power of the office in order to support political friends and go after political enemies. The whole public integrity unit in that office is going to have to be revamped. I believe that they don't have enough resources, for one, but also I think that we need to make sure that it's staffed with people that are going to be apolitical and are going to go where the facts are leading them. I think that the problem is, much like we have seen with police excessive force, public corruption is one of the things that if people believe that no one is looking, there is going to be a greater likelihood that things are going to go bad. What we're seeing in City Hall now is, you know, obviously the federal government step in, and that certainly is their role, but we have seen a complete absence of, you know, just no presence from the local prosecutor in this case, which leads me to believe that their ability to do public corruption work is very limited. They often will go after some people, again, they don't, you know, in other cases, they look the other way. There is obviously a lack of cooperation between the feds and the locals and when it comes to these cases. And therefore you have the problems that we have. I mean, when I was a district attorney in San Francisco, we actually had a task force with the FBI, which, by the way, some of the news and the people that are seeing indicted now in San Francisco were the result of the work that I started with the Federal Bureau of Investigation years ago. And we will do the same kind of work here. I think it's important for people to know that the district attorney is the gatekeeper, is the one that is there to make sure that people play by the rules, and when they don't, that they get appropriate attention, regardless of what their political affiliation is, regardless of whose friends they are.
George, I have a question for you structurally. What is your feeling about having specialized units in the DA's office? Are you in favor of, like, for instance, having a unit, a gang unit, a corruption unit, or do you feel that those units sometimes get too cozy with the people that they're working with?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's always, there's a fine balance, right? I mean, there's certain types of crime like homicides, for instance, where you may want to have prosecutors that understand homicide prosecutions really well. I'm very concerned about the over-specialization of an office, because to the point that you're raising, Andy, I think it gets to the point where people start getting too cozy. I think that obviously by reducing the use of status enhancements like gang enhancements that will impact the quality of their work, I believe, in a good way. But I think that you have to, if you're going to have, like, for instance, environmental may be an area where you want to have a specialized unit. Public corruption, you may want to have a specialized unit. Police use of force, you need people that understand civil rights and understand police force. But it is healthy, number one, to make sure that those units have a mandatory rotation. People should not go to those units and be there for life. And secondly, you have to have very strong check and balances when you're going to have this type of units that are going to sort of isolate themselves, if you will, from the rest of the functions of the office. The bias should be towards de-specialization, but understanding sometimes you're going to need some experts. You just don't want to have things where people become the expert on that area for the rest of their career, and there's no movement within the office.
You know, many of us defense attorneys who represent the minority indigent group charged with serious crimes always have felt that the district attorney's office in LA County, especially as opposed to other counties, uses the gang enhancements in a very, very punitive way. Most prosecutors believe now, and have been taught, the first thing you tell a jury in a gang case is how bad the gang is, and then the jury turns off completely. What is your feeling?
Right.
Do you believe, like the LADA does, that every crime committed by a gang member, whether it's stealing a car or robbing a 7-Eleven to pay for their baby's mama's clothing, do you think that the use of gang enhancements should be more selective? And if you are elected, well, what is your view of the use of gang enhancements?
And I just wanted to add to that point for the gang enhancements. It seems a lot of times the gang enhancements are used against people who are just associating with other people. And do you think at any point the use of those enhancements can interfere with the First Amendment right to freedom of association if you're merely associating with people of your choosing and not committing crimes?
Yeah. Well, first of all, look, let's begin by, saying that we now know that at least one police department was placing young people on the gang files that were not gang members, right? So we started by having a problem with the database itself containing probably hundreds, if not thousands of kids that may have been put into the Cal Gangs file wrongfully. And the problem is that there is no good way to cleanse that, right? So you start with, first of all, a database that is corrupted, number one. Number two, I think that the problem with the use of status enhancements, and it's one that I have really spent a lot of time looking at, especially in the last few years, I've come to the place where I believe that by and large, the status enhancements, such as gang enhancements, have no business in the work anymore. If somebody committed a certain crime, they should be prosecuted for that crime, if we have the evidence to do so. And we need to stay away from status enhancements, because often what we're seeing is that we'll have a base penalty that will be whatever number that is. And by the time you start adding enhancements, you end up with somebody going to prison for a term that may be twice or 3 or even 4 times longer than the base sentence would be. So I will tell you that, number one, as to gang enhancements, they will be pretty much not used if I were to be elected district attorney, but we'll also be looking at other status enhancements to either reduce or eliminate their use altogether.
Thank you.
I had a question just in general. Do you have any thoughts or ideas about how the criminal court system should function in the middle of this pandemic? There's still going to be violent crime going on. There's going to be a need for trials to go forward, and defendants will still have speedy trial rights, but at the same time, people are freaked out to go to courthouses. And do you have any thoughts on what types of cases DA should be filing in the middle of this crisis, and how the courts should be handling it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think especially under the current condition, you should be only filing cases that have a substantial import to public safety in the community. So you're talking about violence, and you're talking about, people that, if they are not addressed, may be harmful to others in a significant way. And certainly, within those cases, the people that demand to have a speedy trial, they should get one. They have a constitutional right to do so. But I would also offer that in many cases, the need for pretrial detention should be reduced substantially, which means that by reducing the number of people that are in pretrial detention, you're also going to lower the need to have a trial under the current conditions. For those cases that we must have a trial because it is a risk to public safety not to have one. And I'm talking about public safety in a very real sense, not some trumped up stuff where you get a shoplifter and now all of a sudden, because they were a gang member, and you're throwing enhancements, and now we're having to drag everybody to court. But let's say that you're talking about, the murder cases, the cases that are very, very serious, and where a resolution needs to occur sooner rather than later. I think that we have to make sure that we do everything that we can to not only protect the rights of the victim and the rights of the accused, but also that we're being very mindful about the health of everybody involved, including lawyers, court personnel, and jurors. So the question then becomes one of how do we strike the balance? And I know that Andy was talking about the concern that he has with jurors being away from the courtroom and perhaps being only in a virtual presence. And some of the suggestions have been made that maybe they could be placed at a courtroom that is empty, adjacent to the courtroom where the trial is taking place. Frankly, there could be other community places where people could be placed. I mean, I would be horrified of jumping in an elevator at the Hall of Justice and going up, 15 or 12 floors or 11 floors on an elevator that has multiple people right now. So avoiding the circumstances that force people to be in that proximity together without, clearly having the protections that we know are required under our current pandemic are important, and striking that balance to make sure that a defense is going to have the ability to have a robust capacity to present a case, to evaluate the credibility of the witnesses, to evaluate potential biases by jurors or witnesses. So I believe that we need to continue to evolve and we need to continue to be creative. But I think that the first thing that we have to do is be as creative as we can to reduce the workload. And I don't think we have gotten there yet. That will thin out a lot of the work that needs to occur. I think that we need to continue to explore people that could be released so that they can, they can take their time putting a defense together. I think that filing cases should also be done very thoughtfully. There are many cases that do not necessarily need to be filed now, that we can wait until a later date, until conditions are different. So there are many things that have to occur, first of all, to reduce the likelihood of people having to go to trial. And then for those that must go to trial, then we need to make sure that we create the right setting so that we have the right level of distancing and the right protections for everyone involved.
So I was wondering, this is obviously a really hard one. But it seems like the future of prisons and jails may be very different, and that we're going to be, putting a lot of nonviolent offenders into alternative sentencing conditions. Well, what's your view, given like your experience in law enforcement and as a district attorney, with what can we do with, what about, the people who are, let's say, serial killers, pedophiles, those particular categories? What's your opinion about like the ability for the society to rehabilitate? And let's assume there isn't rehabilitation. Is the future still the same kind of like prison industrial complex that we currently have? And if not, how do we balance the principles of deterrence and punishment in like a new universe on those kinds of super serious cases? But with people that are human beings that can transmit disease and that can also, that are also living, human beings. So what's your opinion about those in the future of kind of our current complex for dealing with it?
Well, of course. Look, first of all, I'm going to dispose of one piece of it very quickly. Obviously, we over-incarcerate in this country, certainly in this county. And we know there are many people that are in custody right now that do not need to be in custody because they're not the people that you're talking about, right? So we got to figure out how to invest more in reentry services and diversion services so that we do not create situations where people that could be more effectively addressing their problems remote, not in a jail setting or a prison setting, are being addressed. That is very important. Then we will be left with the people that you're talking about, the people that have committed very serious violent offenses, the people that may be presenting a danger to others in a real way. And for those people, we're still going to have some resolutions that are going to include incarceration. Now, the question becomes is, should incarceration be punitive or should be rehabilitative? Should we be looking for ways to ensure that people are given an opportunity to work through their problems and at some point be reintegrated in society, or even for people that perhaps are not going to be reintegrated in society for very, very long periods of time? How do we make sure that our prisons are more humane in the way that we treat people and the way that we handle this population? And I think
also
that
in order to stop the cycle,
reduce the size of the population. Yes, well, as we continue to reduce the population, there's a couple of things that we should be able to benefit from. And it's a reinvestment of money, both in rehabilitation and in intervention, diversion, and reentry, right? Which, by the way, are generally less expensive than just simply packing people up in concrete boxes, one on top of the other. So the first step, I think, is where the direction that we're going now because of COVID is really thinning out the population. We need to continue to make sure that the people that remain in custody are the people that are truly dangerous. And then, as we thin out the population, we need to continue to re-engineer what custody looks like. What are the rehabilitative measures that we're going to take? What are the things that we're going to do to create a more humane environment that are likely to produce better results when people will be released? Look, 95% of the people that go to prisons and jail will be released again. The question is, do they get released on a better condition so that they don't reoffend, or do they get released in a way that they're going to go back and hurt us again because they themselves have been hurt? We haven't taken care of their needs, and they come back again into a situation where they're more likely to reoffend.
Another thing I wanted to bring up, but of course everyone wants to jump in.
George.
You go. Go.
George, I have a question. As you know, our current governor has put a moratorium on the death penalty. In Los Angeles County,
Right.
Every case that is filed with special circumstances is presumed to be a death penalty case. and therefore costing the county
Correct.
millions and millions of dollars by appointing lawyers who are only death qualified, and they have a contract that is costing this county millions unnecessarily. Are you going to follow the governor's lead, at least for the time being, and not seek the death penalty as long as the state of California is not going to seek it, and just go for special circumstances only? Or have you not decided yet?
Well,
It's a tough question.
I have decided. I've made it public. First of all, I was a district attorney for over 8 years. Elected district attorney. Never once thought the death penalty. I'm against the death penalty. I campaign against the death penalty. I have already pledged that I will not seek the death penalty. So if I were to be elected, there will not be any more death penalty cases in the county. I've also made it very clear that we will begin to evaluating the number of people that are currently in death row that perhaps could be taken out of death row into other situations. LA County has roughly about a third of all the people on death row. About 230 or so are people that are on death row from LA County, costing the state and the taxpayers billions of dollars that could be invested in improving prison conditions for everyone. So the answer is, first of all, there will not be any death penalty cases. Any pending death penalty cases will immediately be reevaluated to seek an alternative resolution to the case. And then we will be looking at those that are in death row and trying to figure out how do we start thinning out death row, which will improve prison quality by being able to reinvest in other services within the prison system, which again will probably give us a much better outcome in the long run.
That will make a lot of people very happy. In fact, most prosecutors I know really don't enjoy seeking the death penalty. There are a few, I will say that, I know them personally, but the average prosecutor believes that LWOP is good enough for most people.
Of course, and it should be good enough for society, by the way. It makes sense, right? I think it's important, and I believe that I'm talking to the choir here, but the death penalty is broken on many levels, right? It's broken economically, as you pointed out, Andy, costing the county and the state millions, billions of dollars every year that could be used somewhere else. But it's also very discriminatory in the way that it's being implemented in LA County. 22 people under the current administration have been put on death row. 21 of those are men of color. We haven't figured out a way to bring somebody back alive if they get executed, right? We know that the system fails and fails more often than we like to know. We know that people are wrongfully convicted. I personally could not afford to take with me the possibility of having a wrongfully convicted person be executed. So the death penalty is outlived any utility that it had. I'm not sure that it ever had it. Is inhumane, is impractical, is very expensive, and is very discriminatory. So we just need to we need to abolish the death penalty.
Your lips to God's ears.
I just had a question. After this whole coronavirus epidemic is over, there will probably be a lot of people suffering around the community, people out of work, people who have been sick. How would you approach in deciding what types of cases to file in that situation? I know in the past a lot of people have ended up in jail over victimless drug crimes, and I guess how would you evaluate, whether to file those types of cases versus other types, and how could you do the most helping people out of this crisis by filing smartly?
And Rosa,
Sure.
Can you show your screen that article about the racist enforcement of the stay-at-home order? Maybe just to see what we could.
I had seen there were articles that New York recently did a wave of arrests of people who were violating the social distancing laws, and 39 out of 40 of them were non-white, and there were some videos of people getting tackled and kind of beat up on for doing it. It remind me of the war on drugs in general, how it hits the sort of minority and poor communities the hardest. And I guess how would you that's related to my earlier question, but how would you avoid the prosecution, falling hardest on the sort of minority or communities?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that we have to ensure that we don't criminalize poverty, right? Which is something that unfortunately the criminal justice system does. And this county has gotten that to a science, right? So we have to make sure that being poor is not a crime and that we do not criminalize people for being poor. I think secondly, when it comes to low-level nonviolent offenses or certainly, drug offenses, especially those for personal use, the reality is that we need to start moving away from that. We cannot continue to criminalize addiction and mental health, which is often another component of this war on drugs. We need to make sure that we provide people with both pre-filing diversion opportunities, services, or even if it's a post-filing, that we are being very, very careful with the cases that we decide to file and the tools that we use. We should not, although LA County continues to do, have people being prosecuted because they have small possessions of drug for personal use. Is an antiquated war on drugs mentality that needs to be erased, and that will be something that I will be paying very close attention. When I became the district attorney in San Francisco, about 60% of our workload was drug prosecutions, and I'm talking about primarily possession and low-level sales that often were sales for personal subsistence almost. We dropped out to in the low 20s, and we saw that actually that benefited our community, and we will definitely look to do the same things here. The war on drugs has to end. Unfortunately, in LA County, it hasn't. It continues to be alive and well.
George, can you tell, I was really impressed when you told me, and of course, I'm not surprised that you actually helped in the amicus curiae filing regarding the federal case in Philadelphia regarding supervised drug use. Can you tell us a little bit about that? About
Yes,
that federal case and your participation? And it's like, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I'm a strong supporter, have been for many years, of safe injection sites. Look, we have to start from a place of understanding that drug addiction should not be a crime. Drug addiction is a health condition, much like cancer or COVID. And I think that we have experimented for the last 3 decades using the criminal justice system to try to cure drug addiction, and we have failed horribly and put people in a worse place. One of the advantages of creating safe injection sites, which by the way is happening in other parts of the world very successfully, and I have seen it. I have been to Portugal. I've seen the impact of the decriminalization of drugs by and large in Portugal, is that you see multiple things that happen. First of all, street violence related to drug use and drug sales goes way down. It almost disappears. Secondly, the death as a result of overdoses drops significantly. Thirdly, what we see is actually there's a reduction in drug addiction over a period of time when you provide people a medicalized approach to dealing with a drug addiction. One of the steps in doing that is creating a place where you can have supervised injection sites that are being supervised by medical professionals. That opens the gate for other conversations around health approaches to dealing with drug addiction in a non-law enforcement way that can be very effective. So yes, I signed an amicus in Philadelphia to support the implementation of safe injection site. I was a very outspoken supporter of creating one in San Francisco. It never came to fruition, unfortunately. I lobbied at the state level to actually create a pilot program to have San Francisco and a couple of other counties that were willing to be part of it to create a safe injection site. We must move in this direction. We cannot afford to continue to have people, by the way, shooting up in the streets, often leaving dirty needles that can then, in parks and places where someone else can be harmed. Also the unsafe, the unhealthy conditions upon which people share needles, which creates a whole host of other public health problems. You can reduce that substantially by allowing safe injection sites that are supervised by medical professionals.
So George, I want to share your Wikipedia here and see if this is accurate and ask you about how you came to be yourself, okay? And I'm going to share my screen here and let's just do a little fun trivia and see if this is accurate. And I want to ask you a couple questions.
Sure.
Let's see here. I'm going to share the Wikipedia. Okay, so it says you were born in Havana, Cuba. In 1967, you immigrated to Bell and joined the LAPD, and that your kind of revelation about progressive politics somehow came in 2006 when, as chief of police of the Mesa Police Department, you got into clashes over immigration sweeps. Speaking of which, Roz and I have a client in custody on an immigration hold as a result of one of those sweeps. So tell us, how did you come to, is that all accurate? And how did you come to being a progressive person in law enforcement, and, how did you come to be who you are?
Yeah, a little more complicated than that, right? So most of that is accurate, but actually it was before 2006. I began to start looking at mass incarceration in this country probably around 2001, 2002. And really there were a couple of things that were happening at the same time. I was seeing that we were incarcerating multiple generations of people, usually people of color, people, quite frankly, that grew up in places very similar to the one that I grew up. I grew up in Cudahy. I was a high school dropout. I struggled. I had some not very good experience with the LA County Sheriff's Department, who used to police Cudahy when I was a young kid. And I came to the conclusion that what we were doing was not really creating any more safety. There was the returning investment, if there was ever a returning investment for incarceration, had long ago gone in the negative side. And then I started to work with the Council of State Governments Justice Center, initially on invited as a speaker. Later on, I became a board member. I was a board member for almost 10 years. And we work in justice reinvestment. I work with the Kennedy School of Public Policy at Harvard University on executive sessions on policing and public safety, and later on in probation. I became an avid reader and a student of looking for ways to decarcerate this country and do so in a way that it was safer. Unquestionably, my experience in Arizona was a parting of the waters, not so much because I became more progressive there, but because I had this horrible encounters with Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who was the Maricopa County Sheriff. The city that I was a chief of police was the second largest city in the county. And Maricopa County, by the way, is I want to say it's the fourth or fifth largest county in the country. So it's a very large county. And I saw firsthand the violation of human rights by the sheriff department, targeting Latinos, whether they were here lawfully or not, or whether they were born here or not. Just purely they were being profiled because of their race. They were being incarcerated. We actually saw cases of US-born Latinos being deported. And I happened to have met at least one of those individuals. That eventually led to my launching, myself and three others, the former Attorney General of the state, former mayor of the city of Phoenix, and the former US Attorney. We all launched a complaint with the Justice Department against Joe Arpaio, which eventually led to his prosecution. I then went to Congress to provide testimony about the problems that were going on with local law enforcement engaging in immigration enforcement. I was basically asked to leave Mesa, and that's how I wound up in San Francisco, where Gavin Newsom, who was then mayor, recruited me. I was a chief of police there for about 16 months, and then when Kamala Harris became the Attorney General, I became the district attorney and run twice, got elected twice. But my journey started, as I said, much earlier. And by the time that I became a district attorney, I was very convinced that mass incarceration in this country was driven by elected DAs, and that there was almost no other player in the space that could have the impact that the DA can have in reducing mass incarceration. So I went about becoming the district attorney with a commitment to showing that you could decarcerate and also impact public safety in a good way. And we began doing a lot of work around initially Prop 36 that Andy brought up, which is a reform of 3 strikes. Later on, we work on Prop 47, which was a very different approach to the war on drugs. We did a lot of work around increasing our diversion capacity, increasing our early intervention, bringing in restorative justice work to the office. We began to do a lot of work around juveniles and removing juveniles from the criminal justice system. And interestingly enough, almost every one of those things that we did actually wound up reducing recidivism and impacting our safety. We worked on creating artificial intelligence to take race and race proxies out of police reports so that prosecutors in general crime units would not know what the race of the person was when they made the first decision. And only after they have made a decision to go forward or not, would they be able then to unmask the report and look at videos and photos to see whether the decision will be different. So been doing a lot of this work for a very long period of time, a good part of over a decade now, certainly just in the prosecution side, pretty much a decade, but about 20 years altogether.
And there's a really good book that talks about the Arizona situation. If anybody interested, Chasing the Scream, I'm sure George, you've read that. And it details the story of one drug defendant who ended up, I mean, it's kind of the extreme of everything, who ended up being cooked out in a chain gang in like the Arizona sun during the time you were there.
Yeah.
So basically you've actually like lived through it, seen things, and have like any intelligent person who's seen this type of thing and are in a position to reform.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody, we have some participants out there. I don't know if anybody has any more questions, or Andy, if you do. After this, I was going to post this obviously on our website with a link to donate to you, but I think that obviously the positions that George has is the future of what we need. You know, right now we have generations of people being born into situations where their parents are in custody, and that, you know, prevents them from achieving what they need to achieve, especially during this time that we have right now. I think George's ideas are critical to kind of the future of humanity here, in addition to the future of our criminal justice system.
And I just want to say it's refreshing to see a candidate for DA who really understands these issues so well. It seems like the DA's office so often has a sort of corporate mentality where they just go along with the party line and are maybe afraid to have independent thoughts. But it's really refreshing to see someone out there who's really willing to stand principles and to really fight for the good instead of just towing the party line.
Well, thank you. And you know, one thing that I think is really important for the audience to understand, that the things that we're talking about make sense on many levels. Number one, they make our community safer. Number two, economically, they're much better options because we can reinvest money in social, medical services, mental health services, all the things that actually create a more sustainable community. But more importantly, they're morally right. You know, we cannot continue the legacy of slavery. We cannot continue to criminalize people just simply because they're poor. If you look at even just one aspect of the work, you look at drug use in this country, people of all colors, certainly genders, use drugs proportionally at similar rates. In fact, I would argue that white people generally use drugs at a higher rate than African Americans do in this country. But the attention of the criminal justice system from very early ages, you know, from the time they're teenagers in high school, gets focused on poor kids, kids of color. They get criminalized early on, and they go on a downward spiral where kids that are more affluent, generally white, get to experiment, get to grow out of drugs. They get to be lawyers and doctors and all that other stuff without facing the consequences of the impact of the criminal justice system. And therefore, we are destroying a community while other parts of the community are doing exactly the same thing without any consequences. I don't think there are many people that can say with a straight face that that is the moral and the right thing to do. But that's the thing that we have been doing for the last 3 or 4 decades. So not only are we talking about safety, we're talking about, you know, being thoughtful about the way we use public resources, but we're talking about doing also what's morally right. And you know, it's not often that we can find all the things converge in one package. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one for the other. Here, actually, they all come together. So it could be a win-win for our community.
Not to talk about two politically charged topics, but I think what George's saying is so obvious. Like when we look at Hunter Biden, which we don't have to take any of the scandal out of it, but here's someone who had multiple drug arrests his whole life, and he ends up running a company in the Ukraine.
Right.
So, you know, look what someone can do if they're not penalized by their drug arrests. And what George is saying is also supported by science. If anybody out there is interested, there's a great book by Dr. Carl Hart called High Price, which talks about how the most significant determination of whether someone is going to become a recidivist is not whether they committed a crime, how young they did, how serious it was. It was the level of their involvement with the criminal justice system. So if they get away with it, they'll probably end up being better off. Just kind of kidding, but it is actually the more, you know, people who have multiple chances end up succeeding. And I think from a selfish level that people who are interested in their generations of their, you know, surviving would probably think that the best thing we can do is allow as many people as possible to achieve their potential. Because the more people we allow to do that, the more likely it is we can save humanity, you know, via our environmental problems or whatever they might be. And the more we limit those people to succeed, the more we limit the ability of our species to survive. So even from that perspective, I think this is an obvious answer. Thank you everybody for attending. We're gonna put this on our website also with a donation link. And Andy,
I will finish off. George, I just want to wish you luck and everybody. The best news of the week was when the governor signed the law that says everybody in California can vote by mail. I think that was a sea change for George. I believe that will turn the tide and allow George to be the next DA of LA County. All we need to do now is get people out to vote. That's going to be the key. Vote.
Yeah. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
God bless you.
Thank you.